The Republic is a Platonic dialogue written around 375 BC, and it is one of the greatest achievements in Western philosophy. In this video, we'll talk about the first book in the Republic, which revolves around justice, what constitutes justice, and everything in between. The book is narrated by Socrates, and it starts with Socrates and Glaucon offering their prayers to the goddess at Piraeus. Glaucon, the older brother of Plato, is a very important interlocutor in Platonic dialogues, the same person to whom the entire events of the symposium were narrated, as we talked about in one of my earlier videos on Plato's symposium. So Socrates and Glaucon were offering their prayers when Polemarchus, the son of Cephalus, saw them and asked his servant to go tell Socrates to wait. Then Polemarchus himself comes with a few companions and asks Socrates to come with him, to which Socrates replies that he wasn't intending to spend much time at the Piraeus. Polemarchus then says that see how many of us there are and look at the two of you, so either prove more powerful than us or come with us, which is kind of an indirect threat to Socrates. Now, this use of force to convey a message is prominent throughout the book. This battle between wisdom and force, between knowledge and power, is noticeable throughout the book, especially in the dialogue between Socrates and Thrasymachus, which we'll talk about soon. I guess it's pronounced Thrasymachus. So, anyway, Glaucon and Socrates agree to go to Polemarchus's house. There they meet Cephalus, the father of Polemarchus, who tells Socrates he ought to come visit him more because Cephalus, being old, could not visit Socrates himself. Socrates gets into a conversation with Cephalus and asks him what being old feels like. Cephalus says that he has seen many people in old age whine about how life is terrible, how they cannot do the things which once youth allowed them to do, and how they're not free to pursue many pleasures which they once could. But Cephalus says that these men that are displeased with their lives in old age have themselves to blame, not old age itself, because Cephalus too, being old, does not feel the same way about old age, along with many others that he knows. Then Cephalus tells of how, when he was asked by a man that how does love suit with age, which in my opinion is not love itself but sex and erotic desires which can be pursued in youth. So Cephalus was asked by a man how does love suit with age, to which he replied, I escaped the thing of which you speak. I feel as if I had escaped from a mad and furious master. For certainly old age has a great sense of calm and freedom. When the passions relax their hold, we are freed from the grasp not of one mad master only, but of many. Then Cephalus says that these regrets are to be attributed to the same cause, which is not old age, but men's characters and tempers. For he who is of a calm and happy nature will hardly feel the pressure of age, but to him who is of an opposite disposition, youth and age are equally a burden. Socrates replies to him and says that obviously life is easy for you, bro, because you're rich, okay? You're rich, so life is easy for you even in old age. For wealth is known to be a great comforter. That is exactly what Socrates said. Socrates inquires whether this wealth was inherited or acquired, to which Cephalus replies that it was inherited. Socrates then remarks that this is why Cephalus is indifferent about money, because he inherited it, unlike those that acquired and earned it, who had a great love for their money. Then Cephalus says that he's getting older and he's starting to worry about the gods and divine retribution and the underworld. The underworld is a concept in Greek mythology that after you die, there's this underworld. I'm forgetting the name of the god who rules the underworld, but basically when you die, you have to account for your sins in the underworld. So Cephalus is essentially saying that as he's getting older, he's starting to worry about his retribution and the underworld, all of the concepts which in youth he used to laugh about. But if they were true, if he was to be held accountable for his actions, this thought worried him in old age, now that he's old. On the other hand, those who were free of sins lived a very peaceful life. So Cephalus says, to him who is conscious of no sin and lives in justice and holiness, sweet hope cherishes his soul and is the nurse of his age and the companion of his journey. Socrates then says that now that you speak of justice and money, tell me how they might be connected, to which Cephalus replies that justice involves speaking the truth and paying your debts. So, to Cephalus, justice means firstly speaking the truth and secondly paying back what's owed. And these two qualities or elements are indeed a part of what we call justice, but there are some cases where speaking the truth might not be the most feasible thing to do, or some cases where one would be just in not giving back what's owed. For example, suppose a friend who has entrusted you with arms or a sword, but when he demands you return it to him while he's not in his right mind, it would be just to not return the sword, to not pay the debt. Because he is not in his right mind, he might kill you with this very sword that you return him. So Cephalus replies to this that, okay, I agree that my opinion on justice might not be the most accurate, but anyway, it was nice talking to you, Socrates. I have to go. I have better things to do. I have to take care of the sacrifices. So I can instead argue with my son and take the discussion forward. Now, Polemarchus, the son of Cephalus, says that in his opinion, justice was paying the debt to both friends and to enemies. When asked what he means by that, Polemarchus explains that to one's friends one should do good, and to one's enemies one should do evil, which is the debt that's due to one's enemies. In the view of Polemarchus, justice meant doing good to one's friends and harming one's enemies, basically. Socrates says to this that it is very difficult at times to differentiate between a friend and an enemy, because one who seems to be a friend might turn out to be an enemy, and one who seems to be an enemy might turn out to be a friend, and carries his argument forward by saying that the good man has no enemies. The good man has no enemies, right? And he does harm to no one. So it is perhaps wrong to say that justice means doing good to only one's friends and harming one's enemies, as a good man will mean to improve another's virtue, not to diminish it. Now, one important thing here that you'll notice this thing throughout the dialogue, that the good man means harm to no one, but instead aims to improve another's virtue. Throughout the dialogue, Polemarchus and Thrasymachus aim to intimidate Socrates and somehow win the argument, but Socrates repeatedly tends to them in a very friendly way and means them no harm, but aims to improve their virtue by setting their opinions right. Anyway, now that Socrates corrected Polemarchus in his view and said that injuring another can never be just, so one should not aim to harm one's enemies, Thrasymachus jumped into the conversation and started taunting Socrates. Now, one thing that we need to understand here is that Socrates employs the Socratic method in all of his debates and dialogues, whereby he questions the other person about their own beliefs, and with each question he tries to make them understand how their current understanding is flawed, so that a better understanding can be reached. So throughout the dialogue between Socrates and Polemarchus, Socrates was repeatedly questioning him, which annoyed Thrasymachus, who said, if you want to really know what justice is, you should not only ask but answer, and you should not seek honor to yourself from the refutation of an opponent, but have your own answer. For there is many a one who can ask and cannot answer. And now I will not have you say that justice is duty or advantage or profit or gain or interest, for this sort of nonsense will not do for me. I must have clearness and accuracy. This is basically what Thrasymachus says to Socrates, that he should speak clearly about what justice is. But Socrates again employs one of the most famous techniques in his Socratic method and withdraws or takes a step back in the conversation by saying that, look, Thrasymachus, I know nothing, but you being a very wise man, seem to know much about what justice is. So why don't you tell everyone here what justice means? Socrates essentially waits for Thrasymachus to voice his opinion and does not himself jump right into it and does not share his own views at first. Thrasymachus says that what if we lose the argument, Socrates? What then? Socrates replies to this that if I do lose the argument, I'll learn from the wise. Thrasymachus was expecting a payment to be made to him if he won the argument, but since Socrates had no money, he said that he'll pay when he has the money. Another thing to note here is that Socrates was unlike sophists, which he himself said in his trial as depicted in the Apology by Plato, which we talked about in one of my earlier videos. Sophists basically engaged in debates for their benefit, which was to make money, while Socrates engaged in debates for the benefit of the listeners and never charged any money, which was why he was so poor. So since he did nothing except engaging in debates with people and sharing his wisdom, he did not have any money and would never have money to repay Thrasymachus if Socrates loses this debate. So Glaucon steps up and says that, okay, look, I along with others here will put together a payment if you win, Thrasymachus. So Thrasymachus, seeing the potential payment, starts to speak about what justice means to him and says that justice is simply the interest of the stronger party. He says this and waits for Socrates to applaud him, to praise him, but Socrates asks him to explain this statement. Thrasymachus says to this, the different forms of government make laws democratical, aristocratical, tyrannical with a view to their several interests. And these laws, which are made by them for their own interests, are the justice which they deliver to their subjects, and him who transgresses them they punish as a breaker of the law and unjust. And that is what I mean when I say that in all states there is the same principle of justice, which is the interest of the government. And as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that everywhere there is one principle of justice, which is the interest of the stronger. To this, Socrates says that people who rule a city might be mistaken about what is in the interests of its people and what is not. Just like one cannot be sure and one can be mistaken about who is a good friend and who is an enemy. So while they intend to legislate for the interests of the people, the rulers might make a human error in judgment and end up legislating against their own interests, which shows that justice is not always the interest of the stronger. Socrates then explains to Thrasymachus, I'm constantly trying to get the pronunciation right, but I'm getting it wrong every time, but never mind. Socrates then explains to Thrasymachus that a ruler does not care for his own gain and does nothing for his own interest, but for the interest of the people he rules. Socrates says, there is no one in any rule who, insofar as he is a ruler, considers or enjoins what is for his own interest, but always what is for the interest of his subject or suitable to his art. To that he looks, and that alone he considers in everything which he says and does. Now that Thrasymachus seems to be losing the argument, he falls to insulting the opposition, which is not a characteristic of an intellectual debate. Thrasymachus says, tell me, Socrates, do you have a wet nurse? Tell her to wipe your nose. Thrasymachus then tells Socrates not to mix the shepherd with the sheep, the shepherd who has no regard for the sheep but slaughters them for his own benefits, just like the doctor to whom it won't mean much whether he cures the patient or not, as long as he is getting paid. So technically the unjust man will always gain more than the just man. And to support this statement, Thrasymachus gives an example of a person who does not give income tax and thereby has more than the just man who gives income tax. So injustice, according to Thrasymachus, is stronger than justice. After he says this, Thrasymachus gets up to leave, but Socrates stops him and asks him to stay and defend his position. Socrates says that the unjust man, who according to you is wise and smart, tries to get the better of everybody. But does the wise man want to get the better of everybody, or just the people who do not know what is going on? Now, when he said this, Thrasymachus, obviously, I am paraphrasing. This is not exactly what he said. What Socrates said in actuality was way more complicated, so that is why I paraphrased it. So, he said it in a way that Thrasymachus did not get it either. So, Socrates repeated himself and said that the people who aren't skilled want to get the better of everybody, but those that are knowledgeable only want to get the better of those who aren't. Suppose that a man gets a heart attack, okay, and a cardiologist walks in and starts to treat him. Then another cardiologist enters and sees the first cardiologist already working on the patient, so he is therefore satisfied and says that, okay, my work here is done. The patient is already being treated with the right treatment by the first cardiologist. So the second cardiologist, in this sense, does not want to get the better of the first. Now, consider another example, that a man had a heart attack and a person walks in who knows nothing about treating it or knows nothing about cardiology or doctoring, but still attempts to treat him, still attempts to help him, the man who has had a heart attack. Now, a real cardiologist walks in and therefore tries to get the better of the first fake cardiologist who has no knowledge of doctoring and would end up harming the patient instead of helping him. So Socrates takes this example in the political sphere and says that, does the real politician want to rule the city which is already being well run by a lawful ruler? No, because he does not care for his own interests, but instead for the interests of the people. Just like the doctor does not want to get the better of the first doctor, who's doing just fine. On the other hand, when a city is badly run by people who have no political knowledge and a knowledgeable politician comes in, he would want to get the better of the city, which is analogous to the example of the fake cardiologist. So, Socrates says that the knower only wants to get the better of the ignorant and only for the benefit of the person who's going to be harmed by this ignorance. But the ignorant man wants to get the better of both the knowledgeable person and the ignorant man. Now, what happens is something unexpected. Thrasymachus blushes. Apart from the fact that he's all covered in sweat after the grailing from Socrates, whereby Socrates defeats him in argument. That is the Socratic method. I'm mentioning this again because I believe you'll enjoy it more if you read it rather than listening to me summarizing the book. Because the way Socrates reaches his conclusion is by firstly withdrawing from the conversation, taking a step back, and not revealing his own opinion about a topic, and letting the opponent, which he does not consider an opponent, he's just engaging in a debate, in an argument with a person, and he wants the other person to voice their own opinion first, so that Socrates can refute that argument, remove that from the equation, and then to slowly build upon his own case. Now, obviously, this is just the summary of the dialogue. There are very, very important takeaways, so I suggest you all read the book and reread it at a later point in your life. Because the Republic, which is one of the most important and significant books in Western philosophy and in Platonic dialogues, every time you read the Republic, you'll understand the dialogue better and you'll view it in a very, very different light each time. Because remember, Plato does not include anything which isn't relevant. What might seem to be a weak argument to you only seems so because you do not fully understand it. So if you get stuck at a point, if you do not understand an argument put forth by Socrates, reread it, come back to it at a later point, and you'll see it in a very different light. So That is it for the first book, in the Republic. I'll see you in the next video, in which I'll talk about the second book of Republic by Plato.